Good morning, good morning. Happy Thursday. Today is April 28th, 2022. We're a third into this year. I hope you have made the best of it. My name is Carol White, and I would like to welcome you to this week's episode of When Life Needs a Detox. Now, we're going to take a little detour away from my life with multiple sclerosis. I have something else that I want to talk about. It's always been a question for me biblically. I want to talk today about tithing. I've always had questions concerning tithing. Now, I'm a Christian and I do tithe. I tithe my 10%, but I've always had questions. Like, how did tithing begin? Do you tithe on the net or the gross? And are you committing a sin if you choose one over the other? I've never had these questions answered for me. So I finally decided to look into it myself. This has been on my heart for a couple of decades since I've started tithing. Now, I'm not the best tither in the world. I'm not going to tell anybody I'm a perfect tither, but I get it in. I do tithe. So today's topic is on the subject of tithing. I've always wondered. Now, the first thing we have to do is define what tithing is. Now, according to Webster's Dictionary, tithe as a noun is 1/10 of the annual produce or earnings formerly taken as a tax for the support of the church and clergy. Now, we're always taught that the tithe is for taking care of the church and taking care of the clergy, but it's also for taking care of the poor. That's what tithing is for. It is for taking care of the church building, taking care of the poor of the community, and taking care of the priests or the clergy of the church. But now, how did tithing begin? Well, the first mention of tithing, I did some research, is in Genesis chapter 14. Now, what happened was Lot, the nephew of Abraham, was captured and taken to the Valley of the Kings. When Abraham was notified that Lot had been captured, Lot waged war in the Valley of the Kings. He won. He got Lot back, all of Lot's people and their possessions. Well, when he got back, and I have to look at this because the pronunciation of this particular king's name, it says it's the king of Salem. His name was Melchizedek. Brought out bread and wine when Abraham came back. And he blessed Abraham. And then he blessed God, who delivered the enemies into the hands of Abraham. Now, to show gratitude, Abraham gave 1/10 of the plunder from the Valley of the Kings to the king of Salem. And that was the first tithe, which was at 10%. But now, an interesting thing that I also found out was that, yes, the tithe was at 10%, but the more wealthy of the Hebrew community would give anywhere from 22 to 35% of their wealth and goods to the church in order to make sure that the church, the poor, and the priests were cared for. Isn't that something? The rich took care of the poor. I'm just going to let that rest right there. And before I get any deeper, I'm going to come back. Now, all throughout the Old Testament, you hear about tithing, that you give 10% of your earnings. Now, here's also the thing. Not everybody made money. Farmers would tithe what they had. They had produce. They had chickens, eggs, pigs, sheep. You tithed what you had. Now, before the tithe, there was the burnt offering. Before money was introduced into the community, you simply took the best of what you had and gave it as a burnt offering to God. So if you were raising cattle, you took the best bull out the barn, you sacrificed it to God. You were a wheat farmer, you took the best of your wheat, you offered that back to God to say thank you for a bountiful harvest. Thank you for having healthy, strong cattle. You told God thank you, because that's what I was always taught, that tithe, yes, it takes care of the church, but this is also you saying thank you for what you've been given. And that's how that works. Now, also, I found out one more interesting fact. Tithing is an Old Testament concept. There's really no mention of tithing in the New Testament insofar as what you're supposed to do. Because God didn't, there were strict rules as far as the Old Testament and with the Hebrews and the Jews. Now, when you started expanding and you had Christianity, they weren't told to tithe. They were told to give to God as your heart dictates. Now, they did emphasize that you still have to give back to God and do it with an open, happy heart. Because if you give God something, but you're like, look, I'm going to give this to you, but really, I could use it for something else. You taint, in my mind, you taint the tithe and it becomes worthless. So if you don't, in my mind, if you're not doing it because it's what you want to do and you're happy to do it, you've wasted your time and your money. And I just find it interesting that there have been so many questions in my mind concerning tithing. I think another question that I have is, and I think a lot of people have this question, especially when you first enter the church. Do you tithe on the net or the gross? There are two schools of thought on this one. Now, I asked my pastor this, and I did it during what they call it, a new members class. And I asked this question, and he looked at me and he says, well, nobody told you to have a deferred compensation account. Nobody told you to have a account at the credit union. You owe God everything. That's not what I asked you. And of course, everybody's laughing. And see, I don't like to be embarrassed. And I politely said, well, could you give me a straight answer? And he looked at me, and we did have a discussion afterwards. And it just didn't make sense to me, because if I'm to tithe on what I've received, I didn't receive a gross. I received a net. Well, then my question became, if I tithe on the gross, and I've tithed on the gross my entire working career, when I retire, do I have to tithe? Look, these are questions that are not going to be answered in a couple of minutes. They're not. So I'm more than likely going to just have to expand this for another couple of sessions. But let's recap. The tithe is 1/10 of your annual income or produce that was formerly taken as a tax to support the church and the clergy. We're going to expand that. Your tithe is supposed to take care of the church, the poor, and the clergy. Somehow taking care of the poor has been left out of this current definition. The concept of 10% tithing came after Abraham fought a war to get his nephew Lot back, to show thanks to God for a successful venture. And it was not always 10%, because the rich at one point in the Hebrew community paid anywhere from 22 to 35% of what they owned to the church to take care of the church, the poor, and the clergy. We pay our tithe to show our appreciation for what we have been given. I think in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how to tithe. I mean, can you tithe money, goods and services, your time? And we do need to talk about whether or not you're going to tithe on the gross or the net, which is supposed to be, which is right. And then I want to talk some more about whether or not retirees, if they paid tithe on gross, have to tithe after retirement. This is going to get real interesting. But for right now, my name is Carol White. I have enjoyed my time talking with you, and this has been this week's edition of When Life Needs a Detox. I love you guys to the moon and back. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with me. I'm going to talk to you very soon. Bye-bye now.